Ayo Dosunmu is called one of the best potential trade values in the NBA, and should the Chicago Bulls be looking to take advantage of it? I'm going to give my thoughts on that, plus the ranking of the Chicago Bulls trade assets as well. We're also going to be asking, will the Bulls' commitment to Patrick Willians actually pay off? We're going to talk about all that, a little bit more, right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. And so I want to start off with this article from Aaron Kellerstraus, who wrote and talked about the trade value of each one of the Bulls, right? And kind of ranked the Bulls that he put them in categories. It was a very well thought out article. But in this article, towards the end of it, he mentions and has a segment that's called Best Value in the NBA. And Ayo Dosunmu was ranked as one of the best trade values in the NBA. And when I heard that, my initial thought was, is that accurate? Are we talking about Ayo Dosunmu really being one of the best trade values in the NBA? And I think there's an important distinction that's made here. And it's not that they're calling Ayo Dosunmu the best trade chip in the NBA, but calling Ayo Dosunmu one of the best values in the NBA as far as trading for him. That's where you get into a different discussion. Ayo Dosunmu is making between $7 and $7.5 million over each of the next two seasons. So $7 million this season, $7.5 million next season. And when you look at that, that does make Ayo Dosunmu, when you pair him with that, his production that he's able to give you either off the bench or in the starting lineup, that does create a situation in which Ayo Dosunmu could possibly be one of the best values in the NBA when you look at what his contract is and what that production is as well. And that is an interesting thing for the Bulls to have, despite all the kind of questions around this team and the Bulls trying to move Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic, that a player like Ayo Dosunmu, who as well is 24, factor in his age in that as well, on that $7.5 million contract. Keep in mind, he makes only a little bit over Jevon Carter. And if you look at the production that Jevon Carter gave versus the production that Ayo Dosunmu gives, that's where you start getting into the place where you can start saying, like, wait a second, there is a question to be made here. And so when you hear certain people say, like, the Bulls should be looking to explore Ayo Dosunmu trades because he's not a star, things like that, you can see maybe where that thinking is. Again, that's not thinking that I agree with. And then when you look at just the splits, we know that Ayo Dosunmu for the season averaged 12.2 points per game, 2.8 rebounds per game, 3.2 assists on 50% shooting, and over 40% shooting from three. But then when you look at him specifically as a starter, right, 15.4 points per game, playing 37 minutes per game. He's probably not going to play that many minutes, but again, still over 50% shooting, taking more shots in that time, 12 shots per game he's taking as a starter. Also taking 5 3-pointers per game, hitting that at a 41% clip when he's a starter, 4.5 assists, 3.5 rebounds, over a steal per game, and right over a half a block per game as well. And then let's take that a bit further. The post-All-Star production from Ayo Dosunmu, 23 games post-All-Star break. He averaged 37 minutes per game, almost 17 points on 50% shooting, 38% shooting from three, still taking 5.5, 3 rebounds, 5.5 assists, 1.2 steals, and a half a block per game. That is really good production. The 16.8 points per game, we're talking about people who were borderline all-stars almost scoring that much per game. And then you got to factor in the non-stat type thing, the defensive versatility of Ayo Dosunmu. Ayo Dosunmu guarded 1, 2s, and 3s last season. While not as a versatile defender as like what a Lonzo Ball was when he was fully healthy, or even like a Alex Caruso, he also doesn't get like the deflections that like a Alex Caruso gets. So, pair that in. But Ayo Dosunmu is still a plus defender. And when you look at over the course of his career, despite playing multiple roles between being in the starting lineup, on that, whatever, and the Bulls just overall not being a good defensive team for especially last year as well, the Bulls still, at the end of the day, are a better defensive team by far when Ayo Dosunmu's on the court. And so it's that type of thinking that when you look at it and you do say, yeah, Ayo Dosunmu is maybe one of the most valuable trade assets in the NBA when you factor in age, the amount that he's making, the fact that he is under a cost control contract for 2 more seasons at least. Yeah, at the end of that, you're probably going to have to pay him considerably more money if he keeps this production up. But then you're talking about paying a player who's 26 years old at that point in time, because he's 24 now, going on 27. You'll be paying him for his prime. And while there's always a risk for decline over that, you're still paying a player that's then at that point showed you he can be a starter, he can be a role player off the bench for you, and in either role, as long as you throw more on him, he's going to produce more. And so coming into this, like I wanted to talk about this article as far as ranking the Chicago Bulls trade assets, but the one thing that stuck out to me in this is that, yeah, Ayo Dosunmu is one of the best trade values in the NBA if the Bulls were to make him available. I still don't think that the Bulls should look to trade him in that unless if Josh Giddey hits astronomical ceiling, right? I'm talking about like he turns not just into like a 17, 8, and 8 guy. Let's say he turns into a 20 and 12 guy with still 6 or 7 rebounds, and he becomes a better three-point shooter. You then have Coby White. Let's say he ascends as well. Yeah, your third guard doesn't necessarily have to be the overall best. You still want some good bench production. But if that happened and the Bulls had a replacement, all right, maybe you look to move Ayo Dosunmu. But at the end of the day, like I still don't think the Bulls should look to move him, especially at a time where you don't know how Josh Giddey and Coby White are going to fit together. You just don't know that. We have no we can talk all day about how their skill sets feel, what the numbers tell us, but we don't know how that's going to, come together on the actual basketball court. There's no reason to trade Ayo Dosunmu. Not why is that cost controlled. Yes, he has great trade value, but again, having great trade value means that you're a pretty productive player, and the Bulls need those productive players. But I just thought that was an interesting angle to take and to look at it, is that the Bulls probably do have one of the best value contracts in the NBA with Ayo Dosunmu, and maybe to a lesser extent, Coby White as well. And the only reason I say lesser extent is because he's making more, right? He's making, which is still less than the mid-level exception, so take that for what you will. So Coby White is still another trade value. And while we've judged, and I wouldn't say it's harsh because I think it's accurate, kind of the deals that Arturas Karnisovas has made while he's running the Chicago Bulls, like those two value contracts, the fact that both these players came in and proved kind of a lot of the offseason doubt around them wrong, those are two of the best deals that AK has ever given out. And so, listen, Coby White as well could be in that argument of one of the best value deals in the NBA. $12 million and $12.8 million over the next 2 seasons, respectively. And while, Coby White, is proving himself to be a star, we need to see it more to say that he's a star. He may never be a superstar, but he could be a star. Like, we don't know that for sure yet. That's still a great value right now as well for the Chicago Bulls. And, that's why people do make that conversation and that argument. Should the Bulls be looking to move on from either one of these guys while their value is this high on these contracts and this young? That Venn diagram, as I like to say with things, is where all that overlaps at is amazing trade value for a team that a lot of their trade pieces have devalued over time. I can understand why people are saying that the Bulls should consider trading these guys while their value is at an all-time high. I don't know if their value is ever this high again. Even if Coby White continues his rise of production, even him getting closer to expiring contract, that's closer to having to pay him. And if he's producing still at the level he did last year above that, that's where you're about to pay him. Even though I've talked about before, his max contract is going to be pretty decent, I think, over the course of it when you look at relative max contracts. But at the end of the day, man, I think that the Bulls have 2 really good value contracts. But let's get into this article from Alan Keller-Strauss, who ranked the Bulls assets by trade assets by value. And so the first tier that he had here was negative trade value. And he has Zach LaVine and Lonzo Ball listed in the negative trade value area. I think it's pretty straightforward. Lonzo Ball hasn't played basketball in almost 3 years. Yeah, he has a negative trade value right now. The best value that he has to any team is still the Chicago Bulls, and that could change if he comes in and he actually is healthy, which is a big question here. Like, if Lonzo Ball does come in and he actually is healthy, what does that look like for a Bulls team? And while I've told you guys, a fully healthy Lonzo Ball is probably capped out at 15 to 16 minutes per game, still not playing back-to-backs, all that type of thing. But the thing that he will bring on the floor, right, is a player that theoretically can run the floor. We've got to see how that knee comes. He's not somebody who requires a bunch of possessions. He can hit threes at a high rate. At least that's what he did. It's just questioning how much of that Lonzo Ball is still in there if he were to return. And then you have the Zach LaVine aspect of it, right? But Zach LaVine, does he have negative trade value? Yeah. Is a lot of it narrative? Yes. Is some of it due to just the way that he's performed over his NBA career? Yeah, it definitely has, in my opinion. I think, Zach has his shortcomings as a player, as every NBA player does. But Zach LaVine's shortcomings, of course, are maximized at this time where the Bulls are shopping him. That's where you start. And then on top of that, the not being health factor. And then, there's a recent article as well while we're talking about Zach LaVine that named a perfect team to potentially trade for Zach LaVine as being the Miami Heat, that they would be willing to take that gamble. And part of me thinks that there's a yes and no part to that, right? When you look at Zach LaVine and you look at the Miami Heat, right? The Miami Heat are a team that still are kind of in two worlds, but they're doing a lot more successfully than the Bulls, right? You have Bam, you have Tyler Hero, you have not Tristan De Silva, you have Haize, who I really like on that team, who's providing a lot of value for being a rookie on that team. So you have kind of a area where you could go younger, start building around Bam and his skill set. But then you also have kind of the older players that are on that roster as well, right? The players that, you're still trying to want to compete for the Terry Roziers, for the Jimmy Butlers, trying to take advantage of what you have there. They just brought in Patty Mills as well, so that shows what they're trying to do, right? But then you look at it and say, if the Heat were to make a move for Zach LaVine, would he pair well next to Bam? Would he fit in well next to Haize? Would he fit in next close to Khalil Ware? And I say, yeah. And so, yeah, I think that right now Zach LaVine does have negative trade value, but that could change very early into the NBA season. And all it would theoretically take is Zach LaVine playing well, staying healthy, and showing that he can fit within what the Chicago Bulls are trying to do. And that would make teams feel like he can fit in. And overall, too, I personally would trust Heat culture that they can get Zach LaVine to buy in anyway. But then the next tier of teams says contracts no team would want. And so that in that tier, they have Nikola Vucevic and PWill and Javon Carter. Now, Javon Carter, completely agree with. He has a contract no team would want. PWill and Vooch, let's get into that. When you look at Nikola Vucevic, to me, I've said it before, is that you look at a player that can get you double-doubles every single night, 18 and 11. Yes, very flawed defensively. Yes, a terrible three-point shooter. But if you have a team that doesn't need the three-point shooting, if you have a team that has a defensive big that can pair next to Nikola Vucevic, that's more of a rim protector, more athletic, those type of things. Yeah, if you have a team that's better solidly in pick-and-roll defense, yeah, that can also help Nikola Vucevic out as well. Now, Vooch is a very limited player, but I do think that Vooch will have teams that are interested in him by the trade deadline. That's my personal opinion. So to say that no team would want, I just think that it's the value of what they want. Is that going to fit the Chicago Bulls? That's my personal opinion. You guys can let me know what you think. As far as Patrick Willians is on a deal that is going to be a mid-level exception type deal within probably 2 years of his contract being there. And I think when it comes down to PWill, is that we've seen it. The Bulls fans have a different view on PWill because we drafted him 4th overall. But I've talked very much so. I've gone through the list of players that basically average the same thing as PWill. The only difference is that you see them giving more effort. They don't look like they fall asleep on some plays, but the averages are the same, right? And so that question is always there on how much would PWill contribute if he actually locked in. And that's going to go into the last segment that we have for today is, will the Bulls' commitment in PWill actually pay off? But I do think that PWill is a player that if the Bulls just made available, I think they can get some value for him, but it's not going to be, of course, what the draft capital we spent to get him. But again, nobody really does after you get through the NBA. All right. Next up, they have the expiring contracts tier of players that are expiring, but teams may be interested in. In that, they have Jaylen Terry, Chris Duarte, and Tory Craig. Now, the way that I look at it is this. Tory Craig is absolutely going to be somebody that teams want at the trade deadline. I think the Bulls are hoping for that too. Doesn't mean that it's going to happen depending on who else becomes available, but Tory Craig is the type of player that you see moved at trade deadlines. You get a second-round pick back. A team gets a veteran piece that can help their big, help their playoff push. I do think that expiring contract with Tory Craig can have some value. Not saying hugely valuable, but some value. Same thing kind of with Chris Duarte. Chris Duarte is this theoretical player that gives effort defensive. They can shoot the three ball well. He never really lived up to the promise of his rookie year, but again, his role has changed every year since then as well. That's always an interesting thing to take a look at. And so Chris Duarte is a player as well that I do think that, and he's also a restricted free agent. So if Chris Duarte does earn a role on the Chicago Bulls team, which I have my doubts on when you look at the roster, but if he does and he plays well, I do think that the Bulls could find some trade value for Chris Duarte, mainly because of his contract's not ridiculous, and that restricted free agent aspect of that is going to make teams willing to take that risk because they can own his future and have the right to match any deal that he gets if he works out. The Chris Duarte is another player that I do think can have some trade value for the Chicago Bulls. And then Jaylen Terry. I think Jaylen Terry has no value other than anyone to the Chicago Bulls right now. Now, could a team theoretically look at a long, lanky, athletic wing player and say, hey, no, this is a guy who we can take a look at. This is a guy who we can bring in and maybe we can develop him. Yeah, the Chicago Bulls couldn't develop him for shit because it's the Chicago Bulls, but maybe we can get more out of who Dalonte Terry is. Now, I've had an episode earlier this week on Dalonte Terry and how he can earn a role, and I think that Dalonte Terry overall is that if Dalonte Terry can find a way to do the dirty work for the Chicago Bulls team, that's where the value, at least in this season, could be for Dalonte Terry. I like Dalonte Terry still overall as a player. I'm not ready as some people to write him off as a draft bust yet. I will say that. He got to start showing something this season. But he started showing some signs last year that he can actually stay on the basketball court. Now, how can he build off of that? And I think that comes down to the dirty work that he would have to do as a player. But as far as the trade value aspect of this, which we're talking about, I still think that, yeah, he can provide maybe some, but that most value is to the Bulls. Now, the next tier of players is hard to get equal value, and that's for two players that I don't think the Bulls are looking to move at all. Julian Phillips and Jaylen Smith. I'm not even going to spend a lot of time on it. You know why. Jaylen Smith was just acquired by the Bulls. We've talked about the report that he could have even been promised an opportunity to win the starting center position. I know Bulls fans keep saying, well, what about power forward? He could play. Jaylen Smith has basically exclusively played center and has been more productive at center. A lot of the things that he has, the being able to run the floor, the stretching of the floor as a big, the weak side defense that are kind of better as a center. Now, I get why you're saying in some definitely scenarios he could be playing power forward, but and he may play some power forward minutes for the Bulls, but again, he was promised an opportunity for starting center. To me, that tells me how the Bulls view him. And then Julian Phillips, I just think Julian Phillips is too raw, hasn't been around long enough to where I don't think the Bulls are going to be looking to move on from Julian Phillips anytime soon, personally. So that's my thought. I understand the tier. Yeah, it could be hard to get equal value, but I don't think they're going to be moving on from those guys. But that really kind of takes care of the tiers. There are a few more in there, but not really ones that, I guess we can, for thoroughness, we can get into. They had Kobe White listed as the unpaid star tier, but another player that is going to be, could have great value. And then there was another tier called unknown upside, and that's where Modest Bucelis was in. But there's 0 to no chance that the Bulls are looking to trade Modest Bucelis at this point before he even takes the court for the Chicago Bulls. But if for crazy reasons some superstar wanted to come to the Chicago Bulls, which is unexpected, could if they wanted Modest Bucelis, could that happen? We'll see, right? But I don't think so. And then Josh Giddey was in the prove it year player list, but the Bulls just literally acquired him. They're not going to be looking to move him, even with the restricted free agency hanging over their head. So that's an aspect of it as well that you have to look at. But to get into kind of the last segment and topic that I have here today, that was on Patrick Willians. And I know I talked a lot about Patrick Willians in that tier of contracts that nobody would want. Again, I didn't come up with those tiers, but that was the tier that we talked about him in. Will the Bulls' commitment in PWill pay off? That's the biggest question here, right? The Bulls have made a commitment to PWill throughout his season. When you look at it, he's come into every season, despite how the offseason or anything is gone for him. He's been the starting power forward or a starting role, starting small forward technically, even though he played a lot of power forward minutes even his rookie year with Laurie being in and out of that lineup. But so it's what PWill has, and we've seen a lot with PWill. I think the thing is that we've seen some of the flashes of what PWill could be. The problem is that between whether it's his mental, his mindset, the way that he attacks, sometimes how he falls asleep, or he just kind of is comfortable just kind of going ho-hum about it. We just haven't seen it consistently from PWill. Now, the question is it just comes down to confidence? That's a big question with confidence for PWill. If PWill does unlock his confidence, what will he then look like if he's playing consistently with confidence? 5-year, $90 million that he got this offseason. And you look at it, like I said, it's basically a little bit of a little over the mid-level exception for a solid role player. To me, he got played what modern-day role player money is, and that's how his production has typically been for the Bulls, is role player level. So everybody has concerns about Patrick Willians. When you look at it as well, 2 major injuries over the 4 years of his NBA career that shortened his NBA season. The other 2 years from that, he's played damn near every single game. So it's like this mix between an injury, a player that has had maybe freak injuries, and a player that's been an Iron Man for the Bulls in some seasons. But will that commitment pay off? And I think it has to come down to how he's paid. He's played as a role player, and how much can he be consistently that? If Patrick Willians can become a consistent 10-6 player, let's say 10-6-3, 10 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists per game, would that be enough? And I would say if it's more consistent, right? One of the problems with PWill is that he has these spurts, whereas he'll have like a 3-game stretch where he does pretty good, and then 4 games where he disappears. Consistency could make Patrick Williams' deal and the commitment worth it, because at that point you're getting a wing player, a player that can play the 3 or the 4, that's solid defensively, that can shoot, that can stretch the ball out, and can do some passing. That right there is a valuable player in the NBA. Yes, it's not value living up to the 4th overall pick, but it's value. And I think that either way, the floor of what Patrick Williams can be is what provides that value that the Chicago Bulls felt comfortable giving him a deal like this. That's my personal opinion. Again, we haven't heard from anyone to say that, but that's my personal opinion. I feel like Patrick Williams still does have the opportunity to make a leap. Now, how big of a leap that is, that remains to be seen. But I think the commitment in Patrick Williams comes down to how high his floor is for that Chicago Bulls team. He has a very high floor of still being a productive player for you. And because of that, I do think the commitment will pay off in a sense when you take away the 4th overall pick and being drafted at that level. That's where it comes down to. But I hope that this goes to a season that some of those questions are eliminated for Patrick Williams, and we just get a Patrick Williams that goes out there and attacks it and is a solid player night in and night out for the Chicago Bulls, as well as being able to stay on the court. Let's hope that that's the case. Because I tell you what, if Patrick Williams loses this starting power forward position again, with who Modest Vucevic is behind him, yes, Vucevic is a little bit light right now for the power forward position, but with that, with Julian Phillips, with those guys behind him, I don't know if Patrick Williams regains it, whereas before there were 6'4" guards that were taking his starting power forward position in Javonte Green and Alex Caruso. I just don't know if Patrick Williams, if he loses that starting power forward position this year, if he ever gets a chance to get that back with the young, hungry guys that are behind him. The best that Patrick Williams can do is hope to play extremely well and show that he can fit next to like a Modest Vucevic, because Modest Vucevic being the starting either small forward or power forward is coming, and it's coming soon. And so Patrick Williams has this amount of time to show that he deserves to stay a starter, and then how he can fit in with those players as things go on. But you guys can let me know what you guys think on that down below. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bull Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.